Won't you please, won't you be my neighbor? Anytime we do integration, we take two different entities and we start intermingling their data or their connectivity, there are some additional risks involved. In this video, you and I are going to take a look at what we can do to help mitigate the risks of interconnecting multiple systems together. Someone once said that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So if we have this chain here that goes on, and this is the weakest link right here, that's going to be the breaking point for the chain. Now, what does the weakest link in a chain have to do with our network? Well, let's say, for example, that you and I have security policies in place. We've enforced those policies. We've got technical controls. We've got management controls. And everything is pretty darn good. We're keeping an eye on security on our network. And then we integrate with either another company or another company's business, and we have some kind of a relationship between them. So this is company A, here's company B. Maybe we're connected over some type of virtual private network, which between two different companies would be an extranet. So they've got their firewall there. Maybe we're using IPsec to secure the communications between us. But as we set up this relationship, we might also be setting up some trusts between these two entities, A and B, and we might be sharing data between them. Maybe, for example, we have a data warehouse here, and they've got a data warehouse there, and we're integrating some of that data. And technically, it may be a great idea. However, security-wise, there is a whole boatload of risk that we're introducing whenever we're integrating our systems and our data with somebody else's systems and or data. So to approach this, we'd want to go ahead and use some very specific processes for connecting with and working with business partners. Onboarding traditionally refers to like having an employee, bringing them on board, getting their identity set up so they can have access to your systems. And offboarding would be what we would do for that employee if he left the company, to remove his access and permissions. And that same kind of a process needs to be formalized for business partners. For example, between company A and company B. What data is allowed back and forth? What type of access rights will users like Bob in company A have access to servers and other resources in company B? And perhaps the company or the entity that we're integrating with is social media. So our business partner may indeed be Facebook or one of the many Google subsidiaries, like YouTube for advertising and so forth. And the key is, regardless who we're integrating with, we need to be very careful about what data we're sending, because the other entity may or may not be as careful with that data as we are. So let's say, for example, we had some information. We'll call it abc.doc. That's the data that's fairly sensitive in our organization. And let's say we decide that it's okay that people in organization B have access to this document, abc.doc. Now, if organization B doesn't have really good data loss prevention mechanisms, or they don't have really good security awareness training for their users and so forth, it's possible that organization B, through neglect or simply through lack of proper controls, could leak that information out to entities that shouldn't be looking or viewing at that data. So when considering integration of either two businesses or two data sets or two networks, we should be aware of these security concerns and what's expected of us with the other company's data and vice versa. And one way to help achieve that is by having a set of agreements. An SLA stands for a Service Level Agreement. Now, traditionally, an SLA is referring to a contract between a network service provider and a customer that's going to specify things like what services will be performed, or throughput times, or minimum delay times, and other specifications regarding that network service. But in a broader sense, it can also refer to any type of service that we expect to get from another party. So if company A says we're going to give you this, and company B is going to say we're going to give you that, those details can be quantified as part of a service level agreement between the two organizations. Another type of an agreement that these business partners may have with each other is called a business partner agreement. Now, typically a business partner agreement would be if two entities are going into business together. It would identify, for example, percentage of ownership and how the profits and losses are going to be allocated, or who can make binding decisions. If one of them wants to back out, what's the process for doing that, and how are disputes going to be resolved and so forth. So a business partner agreement is very likely going to be a written set of documents that specifically line out what the two parties are agreeing to. And when it comes to integrating data, it would also specify the details of what data is going to be shared and, for example, how that data should be treated or handled by the other entity, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. Now, in some cases, we may not want to set up a formal business agreement with the other partner, but we still need to have a good understanding of what's expected by both parties. So perhaps we use an MOU, which is a Memorandum of Understanding between the two entities. So maybe the CEO of this company is Jim, and the CEO of this company is Mary, and they want to have some integration or bilateral use of each other's data. And the Memorandum of Understanding is going to be a bilateral agreement between those two parties, between Jim's company and Mary's company. So I'd say the Memo of Understanding is like one step above a gentleman's agreement. In the case of Mary, a gentle person's agreement. And Jim and Mary could be using all of these. They could have service level agreements and a Memorandum of Understanding just to make sure the details are clarified as far as what's expected, what's allowed, between these two entities that are going to be doing the integration. Another agreement that Jim and Mary may have together is something called an ISA, which stands for Interconnection Security Agreement. And the Department of Commerce has even given us a template that we can use to help create an interconnection security agreement. And the beauty of a template, it helps us to remind us things to consider. So we could, anywhere it's yellow, you could put in your own company information, your own contact number. We'll take a look at page 2. Again, simply swapping in the information that's relevant for your companies. And from this table of contents, you can get an idea of all the details that we're going to be considering for this interconnection security agreement. A description of the system, the controls in use, what services are offered, is the data classified or is it sensitive, expectations, how to handle incident reporting. If we go to the next page, details regarding hardware and software requirements, auditing, user awareness training, the escalation procedure, and it's fantastic. So maybe those two companies don't need every single detail, and they can just remove pieces of the template that don't apply to what they're going to be doing as they interconnect their two systems together. But it's always better to be safe than sorry, and it's also very important to get things in writing regarding agreements between two parties. And that way, if there's ever an issue that does have to go to court or does have to go through arbitration, having the written documents that are signed and agreed to by both parties are very, very important in being successful in court or through an arbitration process. So whenever we're integrating either two companies or two systems or sharing data back and forth, some of the risks involve not planning for the details regarding that integration. We don't want to have a oops, I forgot moment or oops, I didn't realize that was sensitive information before we share something or make something available to another party. Because again, if we have company A and company B and we share something sensitive with them and they leak it out to the outside world, that would be an example of unauthorized data sharing. Or maybe we are custodians of some data for a customer and we shouldn't have shared that data with customer B, but because of a lack of controls or a lack of awareness we did, that would make company A negligent because we didn't have the controls in place to stop that data from being shared with company B, who then shared it with the outside world. Issues regarding data ownership, hopefully, are going to be well defined between these two companies. For example, let's say company A has some data that's coming into them and company B has some data that's coming into them, and then together they combine some of that data and create some result. Now the question is, whose data is this? Well, it's a combination of company A and company B, but who's responsible for it? Who's the owner? Do they have joint ownership of that data, or is one company primarily responsible for that data? That needs to be all identified and delineated before they start creating these data sets and storing it. Because it's very likely that the owner of that data is also going to be responsible for the backing up of that data. So if we were creating some new data sets as a combination of input that company A and company B were getting through the process of sharing data back and forth with each other, if that data was lost for some reason, and company A thought that company B was backing it up, and company B thought that company A was backing it up, that scenario will not help in recovering the data. It's going to be gone if nobody backs it up. And remember, regarding data, there's only two types of users: people who have lost data and people who will. So we need to make sure we're prepared in the backup process to have reliable backups. And whoever is ultimately responsible for that data is very likely going to be responsible also for facilitating the backup of that data. And this bullet right here, follow security policies and procedures. When is it okay not to follow security policy and procedures? And the answer is, it's never okay to not follow the procedures set forth in a company, because it's those procedures that are implementing and maintaining the security that we want in place on our system. So if we have special policies regarding the interconnection of these systems, of course we'd want to follow those procedures to the letter. And just like in life, anything that we monitor tends to go ahead and improve. Case in point, if there's 4 workers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they have a manager, but the manager never checks on what they do, ever. Doesn't email, doesn't call, doesn't check. It's very likely that the performance of these 4 employees is going to be a lot less than if the manager periodically interviewed the employees, or checked on their status, or offered his assistance. So the concept is anything that we monitor is likely to improve because of that monitoring. And with security, that's absolutely true. We want to monitor to help verify, first of all, that our controls that are in place are actually working. And then secondly, if there's some exception or some breach or some issue that comes up, we want to make sure we have the monitoring tools in place to identify that issue or problem and then jump right in to correct it. I appreciate you joining me for this video. I've had fun going through it with you. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.